Tuesday, October 20th, and welcome back to The Advantage, where we take you through our data on political ads and spending. I'm Rachel.
And I am Ben. So we are 2 weeks out from the election.
We are.
We have spent a lot of time talking about spending and where the money is going. So today, let's talk about what the Biden and Trump campaigns are spending this money on. What are the messages they're putting in front of voters right now in 2020 with 2 weeks out from the election?
Yeah, well, let's just start broad strokes, right? So obviously COVID is like the conversation of the election. As we're coming down to election day, it seems like that's the focus of debates, that's the focus of town halls, that's the focus of a lot of advertisements, particularly from the Biden camp. In the last week, the Biden camp has aired 15 unique ads about COVID. The Trump team has only aired 3. We'll get into some of that more specifically, but some of the other messages they're pushing: Trump on jobs and taxation, Biden on jobs and healthcare, all kind of tied into the COVID-19 crisis.
Yeah, definitely. So I was looking a lot at the Biden ads, and I found that he's doing some really interesting things. So most of his ads are kind of what you would expect. There's a lot of talking about COVID, how his leadership would be different in the crisis, how they would get a vaccine out safely, timely, listen to scientists, all that. There's a lot of stuff about Medicare, Social Security, some kind of senior-oriented messaging, which makes sense. That's been a big topic recently. And then the last one is about closing tax loopholes and saying, I'm not going to raise your taxes if you make under $400,000, but I will close the Trump tax loopholes for people making above that, which is all fairly standard messaging, all kind of makes sense. But recently we've seen kind of a pivot from him where he's running most of his ads kind of in those topics, but he's running some more targeted kind of GOTV, get out the vote messages, using kind of celebrity or well-known surrogates that I've seen really interesting. The most recent one that we were talking about earlier was the Sabotage Beastie Boys ad that we saw this weekend.
Everywhere I go, people have a story about the Blind Pig. The Blind Pig has been one of those clubs that attract artists from all genres. For 50 years, the Blind Pig has been open and crowded, but right now it's an empty room. This is the reality of Trump's COVID response. We don't know how much longer we can survive not having any revenue. A lot of restaurants and bars that have been mainstays for years will not make it through this. This is Donald Trump's economy. There's no plan, and you don't know how to go forward. It makes me so angry. My only hope for my family and for this business and my community is that Joe Biden wins this election. That's the kind of president we need.
I'm Joe Biden, and I approve.
And that played during a football game.
That played during a football game. I actually saw it for the first time, and I remember thinking about halfway through the ad, I was like, wow, I think this is a Biden ad, but it was interesting because it's just a direct-to-camera guy talking about how his bar's been closed, and then Sabotage by the Beastie Boys cuts in, and then it's Biden talking about the impact COVID has. And I thought it was a really good way of tying kind of what is top line, how do we as a country address this crisis, while tying it to something that we can all kind of relate to as people. Your favorite bar closes down. And I thought that was just a really clever strategy to use. And when Sabotage kicks in on an ad, it really kind of makes you take notice a little bit.
And we've talked a lot about how much money in the bank the Biden campaign has. And obviously when you have that kind of money, you just have far more options available to you about who you can employ as surrogates, how you can mix up your creative messaging, where you can be on air. So obviously that's a huge advantage that they have going for them. But I do think that they've done a good job of varying the ads to hit different people, to draw people in who might necessarily just change the channel when a political ad comes on. If you don't realize it's a political ad until halfway through, you've already watched a good chunk of it.
Yeah.
You're probably going to watch the last 15, 30 seconds. And it also just mixes up the feeling of these ads, so it's not just the candidate standing, talking to the camera, imploring you with some, maybe a specific here or there, but mostly just broad level statements about what I'm going to do as president. It starts to get pretty dry. So I think what we're seeing is they're really using the full extent of their resources to put ads on air that are going to resonate with different people and be a little bit more interesting and shake it up as we come into November 3rd.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we've seen a lot of different kind of targeting from them too, which makes sense. Like, there's this one ad with Ryan Shazier, the Steelers linebacker, who was paralyzed, talking about how he didn't vote in 2016, but he's going to vote this year. It's the most important election of his lifetime. You have the ad with Cindy McCain. You have George Floyd's sister, Bridget Floyd, talking about how the Biden family reached out to them and spoke to them and has been really kind of an asset to them in this what must be an incredibly hard time for them. So I think it's interesting that they're spreading this message around and they're talking to kind of different groups with these different kind of targeted celebrity surrogate endorsements on getting out and voting for Biden. So what about Trump? What is Trump's messaging?
So Trump has always been focused on jobs and the economy,
Yep.
right? That was his big thing in 2016. That's been his thing all through his administration, touting their jobs numbers. That's even the focus now post-shutdowns, post-COVID shutdowns, at least from the spring. The Trump campaign is talking about the great American comeback. We're coming back with jobs. Trump is recovering from COVID. The country is recovering from COVID. So even his coronavirus-specific ads all have that central underlying theme of building back the economy as a way to strengthen the American people and American resolve. He's been messaging a little bit on healthcare, though, has he not?
Yeah, we've seen some interesting stuff on healthcare about how he's going to protect pre-existing conditions, and there's a lot of talk about drug prices and how he's lowered prescription drug prices, kind of a senior targeted message, how he's going to protect Social Security and Medicare. And that's kind of the ground you would expect him to be playing on. That's probably where he feels pretty comfortable talking about the economy, healthcare. I mean, that's kind of standard messaging. Are you surprised at all over the course of the election, when the general election campaign really started back in June and July, there was a bombardment of attack ads from Trump, some really, really kind of brutal ads about how Biden is suffering from dementia and how he's going to defund the police and these people are going to come and murder your grandma was the barely unspoken message of some of these ads, and we kind of thought...
Yeah, there was the old lady with the phone falling
Right.
onto the floor.
Right, and we were talking about it back. Let's play that ad, actually, because
Yeah,
it's so,
we'll take a
so
look at
kind
that.
of remarkable.
You have reached the 911 police emergency line. Due to defunding of the police department, we're sorry, but no one is here to take your call. If you're calling to report a rape, please press 1. To report a murder, press 2. To report a home invasion, press 3. For all other crimes, leave your name and number, and someone will get back to you. Our estimated wait time is currently 5 days. Goodbye.
I'm Donald J. Trump, and I approve this
And so
message.
I remember after we saw that ad, I was talking to you, I think, offline, and we were just like, if that's the messaging in July, what is it gonna ramp up to from there? Because normally you kind of save your attack ads till the end. And they didn't really do that. They've pivoted to a more positive messaging.
So this is just my pure speculation. I think one of the things that we've seen is protests have largely died down, or at least coverage of protests has died down. It's not top of mind the way that it was during the summer. So that attack is going to feel, I think, a little dissonant on the Biden team, or from the Trump campaign on the Biden team, because that's just not part of the overwhelming national conversation the way that it was over the summer. We've also seen really a drill down from the Biden campaign on COVID deaths. So I think the Trump campaigns had to be a little bit on the defensive about the number of people who have died. We're coming into the fall and cases are surging across the country. So that's a huge topic of conversation in the media. It's a huge topic of conversation in the electorate. And also those ads, those really visceral, emotional, negative attack ads, I think play the best with Trump's base. They play the best with people who go to his rallies. They play the best with voters who have never for a second been undecided about who they're voting for. And as we come into the last stretch of this election, there's a lot of conversation going on about undecided voters and what message is going to play to them. And I think a lot of them don't see Joe Biden as this dangerous, demented old man. They see him more as somebody who might raise taxes, or I don't know if I trust him on the economy. So the Trump team, in my opinion, is pivoting back to what they know they've been trusted on. They had good job numbers to point to before COVID, and maybe they can reel people in with that positive messaging.
So do you think it's fair to say it's less of a base election than 2016 in the sense that the country is so energized to vote, and voting levels, early voting has been at such a high level, it makes everyone is turning out as it is, or almost everyone is turning out it is, so you need to talk to those undecideds in the middle to see if you can peel them away from Biden rather than just gearing your base up again and again, like kind of we saw in 2016.
Yeah, I would say so, particularly because, I mean, Trump's base and the Republican Party is in lockstep, like you don't often see.
Yeah.
So I just think that they don't have to worry about the people who are tried and true Trump supporters. But you see some of this from the Biden camp too. I mean, you look at Biden's coronavirus messaging specifically, and it's all there's some negative stuff in there. There's some comments about, you know, Trump not being able to control the virus early on, but it's all very hopeful, and I think both sides are really trying to appeal to Americans who are looking forward to coming out of this crisis, who are trying to do what they can to contribute to ending the crisis. You know, it's a lot of uplifting, positive messages that we're seeing right now. And I think really trying to tie that feeling of hope and recovery to their candidacy specifically, and hopefully that's what resonates with people when they're voting.
That's a great point, and I think we all need some positivity this year, so I think that makes a lot of sense. So that's what's going on TV. What's going on in digital? So this is the first year we have full access to digital political ad spending data from Facebook and Google, so we've had an interesting time looking at that. And one of the things we've seen there is throughout the year that digital has been less of a platform for 30-second persuasion-style television ads than it has been for kind of base messages for direct response, which is fundraising and list building and such. But recently you've seen a pivot more towards kind of get-out-the-vote style ads.
Yeah, so since August, the number of direct response fundraising ads have dropped from 78% of total digital spending to about 47% of total digital spending, and then in tandem, persuasion ads have increased from 18% of total spending to 32%, and get out the vote ads have gone from 3% of total ad spending to 20% of total ad spending.
That is quite the spike in get out the vote. I think we saw this with persuasion, and I think we kind of expected this based on the Democratic primary. We saw a similar trend there, but this barrage of get out the vote spending is really interesting. And it makes sense. I mean, you need to talk to your voters, especially this year. I know, at least for myself, and I know other people as well, voting meant you get in the polls on November 3rd and you vote, and this year there have been so many other options. I know both of us have already early voted. You have people voting by mail. There's so many different voting options now that being able to talk to your voters and telling them different ways they can vote and how they should vote is really crucial this year.
Yeah, and the Biden campaign, speaking of their surrogates, has a really, really deep bench of heavy-hitting surrogates that they've deployed specifically to digital ads. I mean, Michelle Obama alone, I think, has been in a big number of Biden ads urging people to get out.
Really? Because we haven't seen her on TV yet, which kind of surprises me.
But no, she's been doing. Her digital presence is, at least I've noticed. You know, she did. I think it was a final plea to Americans to get out and vote. It was like a 15 or 30-minute segment that was, I think, on Facebook. I could be wrong. Don't quote me on that. But we've definitely seen her, and
she says on TV.
And we've seen, you know, Obama's getting out on the campaign trail soon. I bet we'll see him starting to feature in digital ads. Biden's former opponents in the primary, particularly, this isn't Facebook and Google, but in emails, or sending, you know, emails is from Elizabeth, from Bernie. You know, they're popping up in Facebook ads. I know that Joe Biden is the best man for the job, et cetera, et cetera. So he's really employing some of those big names on the get out the vote side on digital.
That's really fascinating, and I know we're seeing the same thing on the Trump side, though maybe with not quite as high-profile surrogates, which is a little bit interesting. But I mean, that's part of a coordinated media strategy in 2020 is being able to talk to people on all these different platforms. You see it on radio as well, with more kind of get out the vote messaging, radio style as well. So you see it on TV, you see it on radio, you see it on digital. And I mean, it's just part of a comprehensive strategy to reach voters in this world in 2020 where you can't get out and door knock, or getting out and door knocking is certainly limited at the very least. So you need to find all these different avenues to reach people at their own homes.
Exactly. So that's a look at what's going on in the messaging world of the presidential campaign. As always, if you have questions about any of this information, or if you have questions about spending or airings level data, you can reach out to Ben at the address below. And we'll be back next week for one final look at where things stand before Election Day.
Have a good one.